One man discovered a giant city, but upon further investigation found it to be painted on a piece of rubber. Do I have to go on with that? One man discovered a trail of breadcrumbs in the woods. He followed it. It went nowhere. One man wrote to civilization and asked it to explain itself. And everybody in the world answered him. One day a wandering man found a map, but lacking the proper understanding thereof, it simply caused him to get even loster than he had been. Another story in our continuing series of Bullshit Tales for the Wimpy, which of course they find encouraging. One man had a poem. Some things are related and some things not, but even those that aren't are. Note, to no conventions of civilization has this man been invited to speak. In all woods are wolves with not quite the hormonal wherewithal to physically seize leadership of the pack, but with a type of related charisma by which they can stake out a position of being its necessary spiritual head. A situation extremely simple and straightforward, yet one whose structure and dynamics, for some reason, continues to elude common canine intelligence. How a closed system tends to itself beyond the comprehension of its internal constituents who participate in its upkeep. That's the title. Even though man cannot destroy the planet, he is made to believe that he can, so as to cause him to help in its maintenance. Someone wrote to the Inquirer internist and asked, are there actually such things as closed systems? Or do we conceive of such merely as a result of our particular format of consciousness? And the diagnostician replied, the perception of ones, twos, and threes as substantial components of four does not preclude the existence of numbers beyond the quadruplet. And in a P.S., the doctor made pertinent reference to the mind's difficulty in producing a clear picture of itself. Man once wrestled with giants, then with gods, then with midgets, and now with their psychology. A few long for the likes of earlier foes. There was once a man whose mind challenged him to combat, and he thought, I deserve better opposition than that. One man gave all his mental conclusions the nickname, Yo Mama. The headline of this news item is, don't talk to me about relativity if your familiar fidelity still rests with the subcortical. One man says that his life's always been a little weird ever since he got off to a bad start by being born 2 years prematurely. A man wrote to the doctor who's really been around and asked him, is it preferable to give the wrap-up to a story in advance or to put it at the end as a moral? And the doctor replied, okay, but tell me, which comes first, your frontal lobe or your right? A reminder, anyone who still has an intellectual hero needs one. And you should take this reminder as a wake-up call, a jump start, a Band-Aid on a cancer, and a great God Almighty, help me Jesus, a womp bop a loom bop a womp bomb, an even playing field, an uphill battle. Thank you, Lord. Subtle warning to yourself. Once you believe that the routine mind of collective man can be unhealthy, you're locked into an intractable position of always being potentially ill. And of your rights, are you? And of your rights, what are you trying to do? Take all of the fun out of life? And this, you might note, is one of the few examples of a question for which there truly is no answer. The simple, to stay in style, must always be stylish. Or put another way, for the dense to get by, they must stick together and look similar. Man believing that he can understand the nature of the mind by thinking about it is akin to water in the pool announcing that it will later be jumping off the diving board. And a liver sitting in a lounge chair with a Mai Tai said, hey, that might be worth sticking around for. A certain knight who had been out on the road on the quest for a while, one day sent a telegram back to the king asking, should I be attempting to study my mind or the activity taking place therein? And his liege replied with a fax that said, ignore contents of this response to your question. Stop. Just consider the implications of men being able to engage in such a byplay. Stop. And upon reading this, the knight immediately looked into his left saddlebag to discover, as he had suspected, nothing. Calm, quiet, all revealing nothing. A sub-story to one of man's popular creation myths says that, in the beginning, God was the Word, and in fact, by the Word, made man, and made him accordingly a verbal creature. And that shortly after his appearance, God said a word to Adam, and Adam answered with 2. Then God said 3, and Adam responded with 4, and God said 5, and soon they were like running a game with the verbal numbers on each other, and the big guy, having no intention of being taught by the upstart, quit playing and orally abandoned him. As some of you may have already surmised, the reason such versions of these tales are not better known is that they tend to reveal too much. In the mystical city of Istanbul resides no heroes, which is connected to why travelers not fully committed to ultimate arrival thereat are given to imagine otherwise. Those not totally sick of drowning will continue to expect the appearance of a lifeboat. One man began to singularly dread awakening in the morning for fear that he'd look over next to him in the bed and discover that once again he had been sleeping with himself. Then there was this other chap who simply came to the conclusion, well, if my thoughts are not my worst enemy, at least they're as bad as anything I'm ever going to have to face. A remark that did not, as you might expect, sit too well with the muse of ordinarily acceptable proverbs. Looking down on Earth from an extragalactic view, everyone appears the same, except the more conscious, who are mostly invisible anyway. Another unrecognized element in the normal operations of the mind. Life will allow collective man to make certain intellectual inquiries while not permitting them to result in any conclusive findings. Cows, that is, sane, ordinary, middle-class cows, believe that in the bovinian mental realm, some ideas are of more importance than others. Little wonder they have such a reputation for stupidity. Those with but half a mind are those most given to telling you what they think. I do not know whether or not you now recognize the beauty of justice, but even if not, you should by now be impressed by the many flavors in which it comes. Upon seeing a volcano erupt, a man thought, life throwing up. Then later, listening to men talk, thought, it's doing it again. One man, actually on course to Istanbul, found himself in a preschooler's daycare center. One man mused over the lack of diapers for the mind. Cute, but he simply didn't look hard enough. One myth says that after you die, just prior to your appearance before the bar of final judgment, you pass a counter where you may avail yourself of one of three possible aids to your defense and explanation of your life. You can either choose weakness, ill health, and stupidity, circumstances beyond your control, or request DNA testing. And the booming voice of the giant was heard throughout the kingdom above that of the routine beanstalk. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of those undone. But, 'tis just myself, me, mankind. There is no excusing that which needs no excuse, but that which needs none is far too blunt for man to confront without the benefit of excuse. From the clearer, cold-eyed view, there is but one threat to life, and that is death, along with its henchmen of physical ills. That's physical, as in P-H-Y-S-I-C-A-L. Anything else you suffer is mentally conjured and not to be taken seriously by those in search of the secret. The mind has a mode tied to instinct, and one aligned more with itself, which is less used. It also has a third possibility, which is very, very seldom touched. Why sheep smile? So that other sheep will like them and overlook their stupidity. You can't incrementally get to Istanbul, but you must try. Definitions: death and maturity. Two forms of ultimate conflict resolution. One physical, the other mental. Men got their ideas for religious, cultural, and nationalistic rituals from how their minds normally work, though few now remember it. Only the unfinished worry about the health of life. Observing some youths receiving the strict indoctrination of a certain church's doctrines, a man thought to himself that even though, in their own way, religions attempt to do good, that in this instance the young men's intellectual potential was in fact being stunted. Then further reflection on his own mental condition caused him to muse, but hey, I'm in a similar position, and I did it to myself. Part of the secret method of pursuing the secret. The right way to do this sort of thing died yesterday. Always. A viewer writes, on your last show you mentioned a man who said that he'd only speak of the past when the past came back around. And I wonder if you would elaborate on that for me, yours, etc. Etc. I've never said anything like that previously. Get a grip, man. And finally, when some monks heard that Buddha had finally reached awakening, they sought him out to learn from his achievement. That is, until they got up real close to him and collectively thought, we wanted to see one awaken, but not this awake. And they immediately split, fled, and scrambled to set up their own new religion so as to help them forget what they'd seen in the Buddha's eyes. By the by, some legends say that Muhammad, Jesus, and Moses always know that this will happen, which is the only reason they ever look at the crowd. A passenger stopped the conductor and asked, I say, what is that repetitious noise we continue to hear? And was told, that's just the sound of the wheels on the tracks. Oh. The use of external institutions and heroes, which certainly includes religion, if to give you a specific place to start. One of the primo uses is to give man a motivation and a standard. Let us say the man's attempting to improve himself along religious lines. Religion is the prime example again. At least any of you think that religion serves no specific purpose, or is just some sort of general lackey to the civilized drive of life via man. It actually serves some specific purposes related to man's intellect that have nothing to do with God's and etc., even though men think it does. But is, let us say, a man's attempting to improve himself, as they just ordinary men call it. There must be some motivation and there must be some standard by which they believe that they can judge their progress or lack thereof in their attempt to change and improve. Let us say that a man, for whatever reasons, becomes aware of the fact that he continually has thoughts of a quite hostile nature toward his neighbors. Let's say it's two nationalities or two races living border to border. And he continues to look upon these other groups of people, this other group of people, and he is aware of the fact that he just has, as long as he can remember, just this automatic reactive flow of hostility in his thinking. Just his thinking. Don't worry about his behavior. We'll assume he's civilized enough that he does not turn it into overt action. What other kind of action is there? Don't start that crap with me. Jesus. And speaking of that, the man attempts, we'll say that he's Christian. It doesn't matter what, but we'll say he's Christian, and he attempts, he decides that it is untoward of him to continue to tolerate, to entertain these hostile thoughts about his neighbor. It's almost impossible for the mind to conceive of what I'm about to ask right quick is really sort of an entree to this. But can you try and picture why anyone's mind would ever take upon itself to change its operations, its content, but the way in which it moves, were it not for something external that leads it to believe that it should be otherwise? Now, I know you can ask yourself that, and most sane people can't answer it. They can go, what? Would you repeat it? And I can repeat it again. And they go, what? Would you repeat it? And I go, repeat it again. They go, what? And by then they should have given up, because there is no answer to that. It's like you jump up in there and try not to come back down. But there has to be, to start with, some apparent external motivation. So here it is, we have a man who begins to do something that apparently is outside just the normal routine of religious activity. There's something even getting closer to this sort of activity, the attempt to actually affect one's consciousness. So this man undertakes, not just to fulfill the religious disciplines and demands of his particular brand of Christianity, if we're using that, but he decides that this is not good. And he can find, I mean, it's already struck him. He's just taking it to another limit. It's already struck him. It's throughout the Bible and the Old Testament, especially the New Testament, is translated into Jesus speaking about what's in a man's mind. That, you can't just affect behavior. You can't just quit fornicating, committing adultery. You have got to ultimately cease to want to. That is, to cease thinking about it. Better put, not cease wanting to. Even Jesus didn't ask that. He just said, quit doing it and then try to quit thinking about it. But as always, I overstepped it. Of course, that's one thing about not being licensed to do this. What are they going to do? Just bar me? But at any rate, there it is. Let's take the well-known example of the man saying that came to Jesus, representing a mystical and higher level of consciousness, and says, I've tried to follow what I've understood of your teachings, and I don't seem to be getting that much closer to Istanbul, to the kingdom of heaven. What am I doing wrong? And he says, well, for instance, have you quit hating your neighbor? Or have you quit committing adultery? However, he led into it from some of the commandments. Think about, well, I've quit committing adultery. And he says, yeah, but the next step is to quit thinking about it. Which for those of you that are getting really good, I actually was being a little dirty a minute ago when I retracted me saying that he didn't actually say to stop doing it, because to stop thinking about it is that close to stop wanting to, but on a level that does not have anything to do with behavior. Because it's not a man's mind that wants to commit adultery, in case you hadn't noticed. If you believe that, then there's a lecture in psychology. You came to the wrong room. It's right down there next to the boys' gym. They're having a lecture on psychology, because a man does not, or a woman does not want to commit adultery because of anything they ever thought. But at any rate, so Jesus pointed out to him in that example where you can't just stop committing adultery. You can't just be in the world of behavior, the world of events. You have got to, you understand, in response to his question, he's saying if you're going to get any further with this, just ceasing behavior that's prohibited is not enough. You've got to understand that is really just child's play. That's for the adolescents in the temple. It's for the sake of civilization. It is for the serenity of a cowherd. It's got nothing to do with a cow's individual development to some level above the bovinian. So he says it's not just enough that you have ceased to do prescribed behavior, you have got to work on a cessation of thinking about it, which is not the best way to put it. The best way to put it is to quit entertaining, to quit holding on to the bumpers of those kind of thoughts that run through the traffic of your mind. So, back to my fictitious person. This guy, let's assume it has a little more on the neural ball than your average religious person. And somebody gets involved with this activity of this sort, and he is struck by the fact that there is something of grave importance, potential importance, that has nothing to do with adultery and sexuality and morality, that Jesus was saying, that kind of person was saying, that what you've ultimately got to do is get far beyond the behavior and worrying about affecting one's activity to bring it in line with some sort of external prescription is not enough. That what he is actually pointing at is the internal, the world of my states, the way in which I think. So he goes from there. This is fairly classic amongst would-be mystics, that he then he looks around inside of his own mind. He starts becoming aware of it. And I've got to give my fictitious man some credit, or else we'll be here all night talking about him before I ever get anywhere. So we give him credit that my fictitious man was at least as sharp as you are. How about that? So he very shortly gets past the specific embrace in his thoughts, or the extremely close-up embrace in his thoughts of the instinct. That is, he shortly gets beyond the point of being all that concerned about that he has sexual daydreams. He then gets into the idea, because he recognizes that it's not either right or wrong, he just understands that has almost no pertinence specifically from one individual to another. I mean, if you got some kind of sexual daydreams about screwing your neighbor, screwing your neighbor's wife, screwing your neighbor's ox or tree or the rain barrel in the back, whatever it is, it comes from something so basic that there's not really much to be said about it. You then, to bring it to any level resembling that worthy of a person on the quest, he would have to reach the level shortly of looking around and realizing every time this other certain race or religion or nationality or this group of people that culturally seems, just for whatever reason, they walk by him, every time he sees one, his mind just goes into just sarcastic, cynical, abrasive conversations about these dumb mothers, the way they look, the way they dress, their rituals, their religious habits, their cultural custom, whatever it is. And he realizes this, and it is further removed. It is more into the world, relatively speaking, into the world of a man's intellect, is further away from the instinctive level. I got to go on with this because everything is tied to that, but it seems further removed. That he is not wanting to have sex with these people. He's not wanting to have sex with their wives necessarily. It is just an ill-founded. He's got to see it for himself. But he has this sensation that this is not only ill-founded, this is detrimental to me personally. But again, we're back to the question of how would a man ever reach that point were it not for some initial external motivation? And you can't answer it unless you can jump up and not come down.
Yeah.
You can't really answer it, but there is a reason for me to continue to ask this, but it has to do with the apparent closed system in which the mind operates. The key word being apparent. Oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes gestures, you know what I mean? You study the book and it says, that some gesture fits one thing, like you be sincere. I remember this one. It says, put your hand over your heart and try to kind of, turn your eyebrows down like. But then sometimes I don't, well, anyway. Maybe the pages in my book got stuck together. Here we have the man. Back to how things work. And he is now making some effort to stop, or to remember how much he disapproves of it, to remember how much that he thinks he should be looking at this kind of verbal assault on people for no specific reason of which he's aware. I mean, he knows that perhaps if it's two countries, country X and country Y, and he knows he grew up in country X, and as long as he's been there, his family, everybody hates people in country Y. So that's a given. But still, he's got to reach the point, if he resembles anything like a fictitiously reasonable or potentially awakeable man, that he finally realizes this has nothing to do with me individually. It just doesn't. He doesn't have to discuss it. He doesn't have to debate it. He may have already been through a bit of that with his parents, like, why do you hate everybody in country Y and all that, and ask his priest and his rabbi, and it doesn't get anywhere. But he's finally got to strike him that all of this is at the very, very minimal questionable, and I begin to suspect that it is real-time detrimental to me. So he begins in some way trying to stop it, trying to work on it, trying not to do it, trying to become aware of it, whatever you like, whatever your experience would tell you is most likely. He begins to feel like this. That suddenly he sees somebody from country Y walk by, and he begins this, and he catches it. And when he catches it, of course, miracle upon miracle, it's like traffic. It's like the thing momentarily stops. That all he's got to do is catch it once he decides he wants to catch it. Once he decides he wants to do something about it. Now, I remember that. See, I got that one right. Once he wants to do something about it. And so it stops, and he would be very prone internally to go, thank you, Jesus. Or to feel like, Jesus will be proud of me. I'm making incremental progress. Do you follow? That's not still the point, of course, but that is a fairly important right or left-hand turn here in our sojourn for the evening. That people must feel, and if it was not in that more commonly known religious context, if someone had taken up with some really self-labeled mystical operation, some Zen school, some Sufi lodge, some Sufi apparent school that had an identifiable founder at some time ago, Ali Baba, then the person, if they still got involved sooner or later with attempting to stop this kind of this kind of verbal assault on other people, when he would stop it, when the same kind of guy outside the mainstream of religion, when he would do it, he would feel as though Ali Baba would be proud of me. I'm not making fun of this yet. By the time we get to the area of making fun of it, you should understand what it is, and we don't have to stick out our tongues. There's nothing to stick your tongue out of that. But there must be a feeling. There had to be a motivation, and now there must be some way for a long time for a man to have the sensation that he can judge, that he can gauge what he's doing. And so people do. Well, you got your own mind to deal with if you've got any sort of memory by now at all of what's going on, some sort of non-fragmented memory that you have throughout your life, and very likely still do at times. Say to yourself, in essence, these words, that Jesus would be proud of me, Moses would be proud of me, Muhammad would be proud of me, God would be proud of me, if you want to really push it, or some Swami, some prophet, it's the feeling that what amounts to is God, the supreme, objective, creative force. That if God is actually paying attention, I mean, for 20 years, every time I'd see people from country Y, I just immediately I cursed them. I mean, I talked about them like dogs. But now I continually catch it. I understand, and I'm giving the man credit. Remember, we're not. This is the tricky part. We're not talking about morality. We're not talking about religion. We're not talking about people doing better. But the only ways that they try to change is initially a man has to believe that he can and should be doing better, and then he has to have something to gauge it by. Like, well, how do you go about it and why? And that's where religion normally pops in. That is also where, if it's not religion in the context of institution, it appears to be some sort of freelance heroes. Oftentimes outside the religious context, in times past, and they still try it on a lessening scale of success, is mundane political types, tyrants. It's always been history that Neros and Caesars seize political control and appoint themselves the ultimate, or they call themselves a deity or a semi-divine ruler, and they appoint to themselves the ability to decide what men should do to improve themselves, how we would be better Romans, Greeks, Jews, Egyptians, whoever it is. That is a hero, and it does not even have to be an external figure of a hero, at least not in contemporaneous with you or with a person. It can be what I was referring to tonight in one of the news items as an intellectual hero. That is a hero that you imagine. I don't mean it has to be just intellectually the star of all of creation, but it has to be in your mind the notion of a hero, and it can be outside of a religious context. But it still has to be this, the feeling you would go, I'm just going to be silly, sort of, and go, well, nature would have been proud of me. Goethe would have been proud of me. Confucius would have been proud of me that I'm doing this. All of that serves a quite valid, it serves for a long time. It serves for some time, thank you, a valid, inescapable use, purpose. But to attempt to change, which is of course improve oneself, within a closed system is ultimately, and ultimately is not necessarily 50 or 70 years away, but it is ultimately futile. Because you cannot incrementally get to Istanbul. But you must try, is the way the news item went. Here's the rest of it. But you must try for a while. But you cannot improve yourself within a closed system. You cannot improve yourself, not in the sense that we're referring to of an actual shift in what amounts to your genetic makeup. It amounts to a shift in consciousness. You cannot do it incrementally. And you cannot do it within a closed system, and it doesn't matter what the closed system is, whether it's Christianity, Zen, Sufism, or the teachings of Ali Baba, Yogi Bear, or whatever his name is. If it's within a closed system, but see, here's the tricky part. You must start within a closed system. All religions of worldwide importance, all cults, there's less than major religions, all cults, all belief systems, all philosophical schools of thought that take on any sizable life for any length of time, all represent a closed system. That is, they have an introduction, they state a purpose, they have some methods, they have doctrines, dogmas, disciplines, some little ritual, and then they have, where they point to is, we're on the way to perhaps Bucharest. That's close enough to Istanbul. Ankara. All right. Heaven, success. But it's within a closed system. But that is where you must start, is why it is not funny. It's not a point of ridicule to say that someone's attempting to cease the dangerous, if you're attempting to move, if you're attempting to change, the absolutely dangerous, the bloodletting of verbal assaults on other people, mental hostility. A man attempts to stop it in some way, but he will not attempt to stop it in the beginning. He cannot unless he feels as though there's an external direction to do so. It's just that simple. You can laugh at religion, which ultimately it is childish. And you can laugh at all of philosophy, which ultimately is childish. You can laugh at the great world of man's civilization painted on this large piece of rubber, and you can ultimately stretch it, and the son of it looks funny. Of course, you get real good, you don't have to stretch it. You just stand there and look at it, and you think. But until you can do that, a man cannot start out attempting to change what he is internally. That's why I said try and think about it, and you should at least get some notion of what the situation is based upon the fact that you can't really, quote, think about it. For me to say, how would you have ever got started? How would any man, how would any human ever get started attempting to change himself? Were it not that there were externally some directions, some motivations, some forces telling him, urging him, giving him info as to how to change. Your mind can't really answer it, but it's just simply, if you grew up and everything else could be equal, that your mind would go ahead and develop more or less along the lines that an ordinary child's would do. But you that you grew up as the proverbial wild boy. But you could actually do it, and yet simultaneously, more or less, develop a mental capacity or potential, the same as everyone else in the city, but you grew up as the proverbial wild boy, out with wolves or armadillos and flocks of bees and insects. And then one day you show up in Paris. What would it be like? Would you attempt to improve yourself or do better? Here's the real question, would you have attempted to, quote, improve yourself internally while you were in the wild? That's what you can't answer. Because you can say, well, yeah, I would. And I can't disprove you wouldn't, but you're missing the point. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you the point. I assume some of you get it. If a child grew up, and again, you've got to have it both ways. It's impossible. You've got to consider that his intellect, some way, was actually about on a parallel course of development as those in Paris, and he's out here in the wilds of France. And he grows up to some age, and then goes in, and before he gets to the city, for me to say, would he have any mental urge to improve himself, by whatever definition? But would he, in every way, his mind's already beginning to operate in some manner. But he's out there and with no exposure to any other human. And he reaches the age, let's say, of 20. But up until that age, I'm asking you, would he have any desire? Would there be any urge whatsoever for him to, and up here, of course, what we're talking about, to improve himself, to change what was going on? The answer is no, even though the mind can't come up with it. Because the ordinary mind, if it came up with anything, or said, all right, what's the answer? And I said, well, the answer is no. And the ordinary mind goes, well, you can't prove that, which is why I don't talk to ordinary minds. No, you're right, I can't prove it. Caught me again. It would not. You have to have external to you what appears to be some motivation, some direction. But now notice, if you can carry it this far, that it is just reflective, immediately instinctive for the mind of a child to positively react to it. Now I say positively react to it. The first time your parent says, don't spit up your food. You're old enough now to know what we're saying. Don't do that. When I say positively react to it, I do not mean that the child likes it. That's not beside the point. What I mean is that you take it as being a worthwhile message. That the message has some weight. It has some validity. There is some it just simply has some validity. And the child is not, when I say it's reflective and instinctive, the child does not have to have any idea. And it still works. Now I know it's to varying degrees, and the child doesn't immediately quit spitting up or doing in his pants just because his parents say, well, now you can talk a little bit. You know what no means by now. You're as smart as our Cocker Spaniel. Now you look here, little man. No, you know what that means. And they can look in his eyes, if we're just talking about ordinary sane humans. And they can look in the kid's eyes, and the kid, he can't hide it. He looks like, yeah, I know what no means. And they say, well, don't do that. The kid just immediately reacts to it positively in a genuine manner. Again, forgetting whether he wants to or not. That's not what I mean by genuine and positive. He reacts to it on the basis that this is an instinctive, this is an inescapable, this is a natural part of life. It's for someone external to me to say, do this and don't do that. Whether you do it or not is not the point. Once you buy into it, It's like that thing the person wrote me, is that little, for copyright reasons, it said on that box of software, somebody said, that had a notice that said, once you open the cellophane, once you open the wrapping of this package, you have, through that act, agreed to the contract regarding copyrights, what it meant, the contract and the agreement within. And you think, well, wait a minute. When I open it, and by the time I get out the contract and whatever this agreement is referring to, it's too late. Yes. But that's what happens as soon as your mind starts. It's like later on that ordinary people, later on, they believe they're becoming analytical to say, well, some of my thoughts I approve of. Some of the things my parents taught me, some of the things my religion taught me, I guess they, some of it's probably useful, but a bunch of it's just a bunch of crap, and it's just verbiage. Oh, really? Once you open that package, darling, you have bought into it. I mean, the rest of your life you can rant and rail against parts of it, but you have agreed to it. You had no choice. Same way, that's what I'm trying to infer, is that the mind reacts immediately to it. It is just as natural, and psychology, well, nobody ever sees this because they can't deal with it any more than me having the audacity. No, the insane audacity to say that children learn to talk, or they begin to speak. They already know how, but they hold back. But children begin to speak once they have learned everything they're going to learn. Then they start speaking. I guess psychology will stumble upon that at the same time that they do what I'm saying now. Beside the point. Read never. Be done with it. The mind reacts just absolutely automatically as external directions being genuine, expected, necessary. And from henceforth, and we're not just talking about behavior now, it certainly affects behavior, and that's where it starts, as parents saying, don't do that. But it affects the whole desire, it affects the whole dynamics of humans attempting to change themselves. It goes back to my impossible situation of a child growing up as a wild boy, and his intellect still in some way growing more or less as they did in the city, but a kid out by himself with no human exposure, his mind would always be thinking something's missing and would never know what. And what it would be missing would be, as soon as it did, wander into downtown Paris, get around other humans, and after the initial fascination of other humans with this wild person, notice that he'd walk in their house and he would squat on the floor and do it. And they go, wait a minute, come on, you're an intriguing kid, but you can't do that. He would immediately, I suggest you can't, anyway, I'm telling you, he would immediately, his mind go, aha. And he would have no way to describe it. That is not the way it happens to their perception, to anyone's perception, but that's what it had been missing, was something apparently against which to push. Or look at it another way, something to push against it. Without that, the mind cannot ignite. So that's why the wild child would have never, his mind, when I said it was absolutely imaginary, his mind could not develop in any way similar to that of a child around other humans. So beyond that very simple level, if we're talking about people attempting to do something extraordinary, they could never start it unless there is somewhere external to them some source that apparently is pointing in that direction of Jesus saying, listen, do not hate your neighbor mentally. And a man goes, ah! Of course, he may have heard it for 20 years, 30 years, and one day it finally strikes him, ah! But it would have never happened were it not for it apparently without it having an external source. Then, that's one thing. That's one foot to get him walking. The second foot is, if he's going to take more than one step, he has got to feel as though he is making some incremental progress. And to do so, he must judge it on the basis that God or Jesus would be proud of me, because that is what he feels whenever he can manage to interfere, to stop that flow of verbal aggression against other people. They started out doing on the basis that to be a good Christian, to be a good Jew, Buddhist, whatever, Muslim, that's all in all religions, is you've got to be able to do that. And so a guy goes, well, and if he gets good, as I said, we're assuming that my fictitious man takes it even past the point of the simple attendee, rote participation in the religion, that he actually understands. He gets involved with them. He's wired up for the mystical quest. but he doesn't know where to go, but he begins to realize right there, right out in public, right in front of me, and I've heard it 1,000 times, but one day it strikes him that right here, there is actual transcendental information right here. At any rate, so he begins to take the religion, whichever one it is, in this case I was using Christianity, very seriously, as an actual tool. Not having to do anything with life after death, but having to do something with changing his internal state now. Not seeking some elusive physical kingdom of heaven in the sky after you die, but he understands that that refers to an internal state possible now. And he begins to work on it, but he will not even keep working on it for a while unless at the times he is able to accomplish, in this case, let's say the interference with this internal verbal aggression, and he does it, and it's not enough to the mind. For a long time, the mind, after it stops it, and it realizes, well, I stopped it. It knows it did the right thing for its reason. And we're giving him credit. It's getting a little beyond. He's past the point that he's going to run to a priest and say, guess what? Guess what? And the priest will go, you've been screwing ring barrels again. No. I've been involved. I've been taking the doctrines of the church, and I am now able to use them in some mystical way. I see it has to do with, you start all that. I'm using a priest. You talk to a priest. That is, you talk to the church. That is, you talk to the horizontal, civilized level of human experience, and they're going to dismiss it. They go, well, you're overdoing it. You're getting carried away. In other words, there's no one to positively respond to you inside the institution in which you have evidently taken, at least commenced your quest inside the church, but you cannot then turn to the church and expect encouragement. But there must be encouragement. And so that's why I'm saying in some way, all you got to do is look in yourself, that a man, this fictitious guy, he is able to interfere this verbal assault on other people, this mental verbal assault on other people, for his own reasons. He's a little past the point of worrying about, or he's not doing it just to make his local priest happy, or his mother happy. He's not doing it to get a star by his name in Catholic Sunday school or wherever they have. He understands this is for my own reasons, but for one, he would not have put out the first left foot and got started on this had it not been for him picking it up, the information, the direction, the encouragement from some external source. In this case, I'm using Christianity. But he still would have never got past a second step to actually move at all. Were he not able to, when he apparently made a second step, like, well, I was able to do it. And it must immediately be followed. If there's nothing following it, it's like a man just stops. Because there must be a feeling that I have accomplished something. But he doesn't know what. And so the feeling is, God will be proud of me. Because Jesus said, that's exactly, I understand it now, at least to a deeper level than they're teaching it. I understand that Jesus was saying that the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven is in you, and you've got to affect your internal states. That the idea of not hating your neighbor is not just a proscription against overt hostility acted toward your neighbor, but a kind of mental. I understand that. So he got one step, and he's already put down his foot for the second step, but he'll never get the sensation unless after he is able to not do it, that he's able to accomplish a cessation of this verbal onslaught internally. He's able to do it once, twice, a dozen times. But very shortly, if it's not followed by a feeling that I have accomplished something, and here's the trick for a long time. He doesn't know whether he's accomplished anything except in comparison to what he has analyzed, what he's interpreted the original external direction to be. That he has interpreted Jesus to say, you should not hate your fellow man mentally. All right, I accept that. So he goes on, and every time he is able to do it, it doesn't seem like something is lacking, and very shortly, he'll either stop or he'll do this. He will begin to say, Jesus will be proud of me. That's what's lacking for a long time, because he must feel as though I've made some progress, but he doesn't know why. But if you stay there, then you stay. Look at that several ways. You stay that you have nailed your foot down, your left foot or your right foot, but you nail one foot to the floor, albeit initially, apparently, with a metaphysical spike. A motivation to do that which is greater, to do that which is transcendental, to do that which is indeed mystical. But you have nailed your foot on the floor, to the floor, which you had to do to ever start. In this case, let's say Christianity. It could be anything. You've nailed it there, and you must understand my allegory, if you do not eventually get it up, all you'll do is go in circles. And that is the nature of attempting to improve oneself mentally inside of a closed system, in case you think closed system is simply life on earth, or four-dimensional reality as I call it, or the universe. It's your mind. The rest of that's way out of our control. Not way out of your control. Should be, it's way beyond what should be your rational field of interest. Because the closed system, you don't have to look for some theoretical or even metaphorical meaning that you may think I have in mind when I talk about a closed universe or a closed system. I don't say closed universe, I say closed system. But you may think I'm referring to simply the physical cosmos, or I may be referring to the limitations of a, whatever it is, like a four-dimensional reality, whereas there might be in fact a subcontext to a greater reality of greater numbers. Yeah, maybe. But you don't have to look any further than the few millimeters between your eyeballs and your skull. Is within there you have the living, always available example of a closed system. You cannot think your way out of it, which I guess is easy enough to say, but how about this? You can't improve your way out of it, which is why, back where we started, I was trying to get you to see the, not being a commentary on religion, but on the human mind, is the purpose that religion serves. The religion that the purpose that all human institutions serve. All pictures of heroes. That it seems to be something, that is something apparently, seems to be something external to the person that initially gives them some motivation somewhere, that a Jesus, a hero, somebody says, if you want to experience something extraordinary, the first thing you must do is step here. And a man does it. Well, as soon as he reads it, if he's wired up the right way, he goes, yes. And he steps. But he would have never done it without that. But if he keeps doing that, if he keeps doing it to be a Christian, to please Jesus, to make Moses proud of him, to make your mama go, what a nice little boy, if she was still here alive, you'll go round and round a circle. Nothing wrong, I don't mean to overdo that. You'll simply live out your life. You could become famous. You could become an expert, a recognized authority in the field. But it will not change a man's consciousness. Because you have got to ultimately free yourself from any teaching, no matter what. And you've got to free yourself. It's really breaking down now, because it's not a free yourself, but you've got to get past the point that there's some reason that you're doing this. Well, God out of me. I'll just go ahead and tell you. Somewhere way beyond, it's somewhere between Bucharest and Istanbul. I mean, it's way down the line, but it's going to hit you. That if you are locked into, well, I'm doing this because of any reason, every time you do that, the train stops. Or you find yourself out on a platform smoking a cigarette and drinking, and you think, well, shit, I don't even drink and smoke anymore, and here I am. What the hell's going on? That. What? Yes, exactly. Oh. All right, put it to you another way. An older way, I repeat myself, but now maybe make it a little more sense. Let's look at from the other direction. One of the extreme difficulties of people ever pursuing this in a more direct form is because, or if they could see it, I don't mean because of the way I'm doing it, but if you could see in the beginning how directly it is, you would understand why it cannot start out that directly. Because to start that directly, it's you're trying to change. And the reason is, there is no reason. Yeah. And everyone's mind, especially you sharp people with IQs way up in the 3-numbered things, and your mind goes, ha, 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 ha. One of those slippery paradoxes. One of those slippery non sequiturs. Oh no. It is simply that you're doing this for no reason. Except you can't start out there. You start out and there has to be a reason. No matter how flimsy it may look. No matter how open to attack by it. At any rate, there has got to be. You got no choice. You start out wanting to please Jesus. Wanting to please Buddha. After you once find out that Buddha says, the trick is to abandon mental suffering. Or he says the trick is to abandon suffering. The life is suffering. And you hear all that and you hear all that, and one day it struck you, wait a minute. That son of a gun meant something else. He wasn't talking about shingles and warts and dandruff. He was talking about something else, and it hit you what it was. It was priceless. You would have never gotten that far had you not read these words, these little dots on papers, or heard these little sound waves that somebody attributed to this guy that lived 2,500 years ago, and he said so-and-so, and all this got into your senses, and finally it made you go, ah! So it's priceless. And you will hold a warm spot in your heart for whoever it was, apparently, or whatever it was that got your first. And then after that, though, you won't keep walking, except at the times you apparently can cease mental suffering. That is, you quit living the ordinary life. And every time you do, I'm just, I put the word saying that you feel, well, Buddha would be proud of me. But it is a kind of warmth. And if we had to put it in words, it amounts to, whenever you're able to do it, it's your thing that Buddha would be proud of me. Which, from that view, you know damn well he would. That you took what he apparently said, it got you started. It had not been for that, you figure I'd still be wandering around in the woods every 10 years bumping into Dante again. Us both going, have you found anything? No, and off you go again. And so you have this absolutely singular regard, in a non-heroic sense, but a singular regard for a Buddha or Abraham or Lao. But you also understand, well, and along the way is that feeling I was trying to say is every time you accomplish it, when I was putting the words that Jesus or Buddha would be proud of me, it's the feeling of warmth and companionship, is the feeling of closeness, that you understand that you were right then able to do the very thing he was talking about. And so you know damn well, if he was there, you wouldn't turn around and tell him. You wouldn't wait for him to go, oh, bless your little heart, because you'd assume that Buddha's now part of your consciousness, that he's a mind reader, that he's now part of your consciousness, or Jesus, or Moses, or Muhammad. And so what you know is that at the times you can do that with your consciousness, his consciousness, were he here, he would be proud of you. That it's like, well, somebody could share what I'm doing. And he could, you're right. But there comes a time you have got to see past that. And if I was trying the backdoor approach again, that is why a direct form of this is not only not possible and not popular, it can't be popular or possible. Okay, you work on that. It's because there is no Buddha, there is no Jesus, there is no reason to do this. You can't start out on that basis. But eventually, you must see there is no reason to do this. You're not pleasing anybody. Of course, some of you, I know how it goes, will finally get to that point, and you go, after you might have heard it from here 10 years, let's say, and one day it strikes you on your own, and you go, well, goddamn. So that's what it meant. And you realize that you have been trying to do it for a reason, even after you heard, well, there's no reason. That's why you have to imagine there's a reason. You have to imagine there is something we're struggling against, and by God, we'll get here together, and we'll put our collective efforts together, and we'll come up with some methods, or we'll find some old ones that have worked, and by God, we'll work on this problem. I mean, because it's a problem, because we understand. Well, all aboard. That all get on?